All right, all right, all right. Bit of an abrupt stop to that music there. But hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims. And if you haven't already booked your tickets to Edinburgh, you should do that immediately. The Edinburgh EU Chatbot Summit is happening in March, and VUX World will have a stage there, and we're going to be doing a track at the Edinburgh Summit. It's going to be absolutely amazing. We've got Vodafone talking about how they've built Toby. We've got Love Holidays talking about how they built Sandy. We're going to be talking all about how enterprises are automating and getting business value from conversational AI. It's on the 16th, 15th, and 16th of March. You can save 30% on your tickets, might even be 40%, if you go to the website, theeuropeanchatbot.com, and use the promo code VUXEU23. It's presented by Core AI, and we're going to hear a load more about this over the next few weeks. So please do check it out. Now, my guest today is the co-founder of one of the most exciting companies in the NLP space, Cohere. It is Nick Frosst. Nick, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. From coming from Canada, from Toronto, very hot spot, basically, isn't it? Toronto for tech startups and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. These days it really is, and in particular for AI, great place to be for that.
Yeah, definitely. Shout out to our friends at VoiceFlow who were founded in Toronto, which is very good stuff. Very good stuff. So thank you for joining me, Nick. Really appreciate it. Thanks for spending some time with me. Your kind of your website and emails and all that kind of stuff must be kind of going absolutely ballistic at the moment. It seems as though in the last 3 months the whole world has woken up to the power of LLMs.
Yeah, there's been a real shift in the past few months since the public release of ChatGPT, and it's a really exciting time for the space.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting area. I mean, there's been a lot of work and a lot of really interesting kind of applications that existed before that kind of ChatGPT was kind of released. But it just seems as though what that managed to do was just to put it into on the radar of, let's say, the average person, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not the first person inside this space to like think about this and point this out, but I think what like ChatGPT's brilliance was not like a scientific breakthrough. It wasn't like the reason why it did so well wasn't because we figured out some new machine learning technique or because we tried some new like architecture or something. It really just took off because the folks at OpenAI did a really great job of taking existing tech and training it on a very particular type of data. And so that when people interacted with the model, it gives the impression of it being much, much better than what's come before. And for a usability point of view, like it totally is. It's way easier for the average person to like put in something to ChatGPT and get out some useful text. But it's underpinned by the same stuff that that OpenAI has been building before. Like they have a series of models, and ChatGPT is a natural progression, not of like scientific development, but of just the data that they're modeling. And likewise, Cohere, like we sell a bunch of models that follow instructions. We now fine tune off of human feedback the same way. And we've been seeing as we've continued to do that, like it's just so much easier for people to use the tech. So I think it's super interesting that it's like this thing that is what woke the world up to the power of it. And I think it's really like a parable of, talks about it says something about not underestimating UX. And like, it's one thing to build that technology and another to tailor it and like make it specifically useful for people in a conversational thing that really illustrates the wide range of stuff it can do really well. So yeah, super exciting time.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that time would have come with Alexa because it was kind of like purpose built to talk to, and you talk to it and it should talk back to you, but it didn't quite have the same impact, did it? It was very much a slow burner, Alexa.
Well, yeah. And that's because Alexa and Google Home and Siri were all built on fundamentally different technology. So like when I said the difference between GPT and ChatGPT, or like Cohere between our extra large model and our command model, that's not a difference of technology. That's just a difference of like data. Like what data are we training this model on? But it's the same underlying tech. Now, Alexa completely different tech. Alexa's like, when those things first came out, I remember, like, I've been, excited about when those things first came out. I was up in Canada when Google Home came out, and I went down to the States, like, in part because I wanted to get a Google Home, and they were selling them in the States. They weren't selling them in Canada. Like, I was super excited about it. I bought like 3, I plugged them into my house, and over the next few years, I slowly unplugged them because they didn't, like, they fundamentally didn't work, because you'd ask it a thing and it wouldn't quite get it, or you'd ask it and it would like do the wrong thing or something, and it very quickly became like a joke. Like, the only way I would use them in my house would be for the purposes of asking a stupid thing and getting it to answer, because functionally it wasn't any more efficient than just using your phone. I mean, the same happened when those were on the phone, right? There was a brief moment when Siri came out. You'd see people walking around the street being like, oh, Siri, like, do this thing. And that stopped really quickly. And the reason it stopped was that if you did that, you looked stupid, like walking around the street. And the reason you look stupid was not because we're not used to people like talking to their phones in public. Like, that happens all the time. But you look stupid because anybody seeing you did it knew what you were doing was futile. Like, knew that what you were doing was not actually more effective than just using the phone. And you were using this technology because you were excited about the technology, not because it was an effective way of interacting with your phone. So there was that brief moment, and then, like, publicly everybody knew this was not a good idea, and now it's dropped. Like, you don't see people walking around asking Siri to do anything. And that's because it's based on template matching, pattern matching, old school NLP stuff, not based on massive transformers trained on the full web and then refined on human preferences. So, like, there's a real technological reason for why Alexa didn't wake the world up to this. And that's because there was nothing to be woken up to. Because, like, fundamentally, the tech underpinning it is not exciting. And that's like different now. Like, now the text, like the tech, the models that Cohere serves are really good at solving problems and doing things. We have a long, like, we're still going to make them better. There's a long way to go. Stuff that, like, same with the people at OpenAI and the other large language model providers out there. Like, I think we're all just scratching the surface of what can be delivered by these models. Whereas when Alexa came out, that was the best it was going to get. And it kind of only went downhill from there. Yeah.
Interesting. So you kind of alluded to some of the differences there. I wonder if you can explain a little bit more about some of the differences between Cohere's language models and how that works. You mentioned and alluded to transformers there versus maybe more of an intent-based kind of model. I wonder if you can explain a little bit about what some of those fundamental differences are and what the impact of that is for Cohere, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So we build language models that are based on transformers. That's the same underlying tech that OpenAI uses. Our co-founder Aiden was involved in the paper that first introduced those models. The paper's called "Attention is All You Need," and that's the paper that came out in 2017 that kind of kicked off this whole thing. So it's the same underlying tech. We put a lot of effort into making these models, like, particularly useful for business applications. So we're not an AGI shop. Like, Cohere is not a company dedicated to building artificial general intelligence. We're a company dedicated to taking large language models and making them, like, useful and ready to solve real world problems as soon as possible. So that, like, bears out in a few ways in the product we offer. Like, for instance, we just released an embedding model that can do search, and it can do search over 100 different languages. And that's, like, the reason why we did that. Scientifically, like, stuff like that has been, I guess people have done things like that a little bit before. There's never been a model that's quite as good at these, like, as 100 languages for embeddings. And the reason we're doing that is, like, that's a business problem people run into. Like, frequently, any global company wants to do semantic search over their documents, or cluster things that they've gotten in from customers, or do intent matching from, like, messages or something. Any global company is a multilingual company. Like, it's a multilingual world. So that's a reason why we pushed really hard on that. So those little differences of us not being interested in AGI, but instead being interested in, like, solving problems, bear out in a few ways across what we're prioritizing.
Very interesting. And what kind of other examples would there be? I know that you kind of alluded to some there around intent matching and classification, semantic search. You kind of mentioned with those embeddings. Like, I wonder if you can share a bit of an example of how companies are sort of utilizing this technology and how that manifests itself in various use cases that you're noticing at some of those companies.
Yeah, I mean, so we sell a classification endpoint as well, so you can give text and a few examples of how you'd like things to be classified and classify. And people have been using that for a wide range of things. The embedding thing is, yeah, the big use cases are search. So like you have 100 documents and you want to find the most relevant one, give it a query and you can get it back. But then the other like the other ones that are a little more odd are like automatic cluster detection or something. So you have like 1,000 documents and you want to figure out like what are the types of things people saying. I've seen that those our endpoints can be combined to do like groundedness. So if you want to generate from a model, like you want to answer some question about something, but you want to pull from a knowledge database, well then you can like use the embedding endpoint to find the relevant text, give that the generate model, and then generate the answer from that. Yeah, so the embedding stuff a lot of the time is based around various forms of search. It's like that's really what it's the best for, and then classification after that. The generate stuff, like that's the use cases are wildly diverse. That's like one thing that it's been really fun about running a company like Cohere, is that like you check in on what people are, you ask people what they're building with Cohere, get them to show you, and I'm frequently surprised and like excited. Like, oh wow, I didn't know you could do that, and then you see this thing come up. So that's pretty fun.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's amazing how language understanding and natural language processing, the use case that I mean, I gravitate to this all the time because this is the kind of world that we operate in is conversational assistants,
Yep.
chatbots, voice assistants, things like that. But when you see some of the things that get created with some of these large language models, it is absolutely amazing, isn't it? From
Yeah.
things like writing assistants and all these kind of different programs, it's amazing. What are some of the sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's the recent things that you've seen from a product perspective that people have been building with Cohere that's been different or really impressive?
Saw somebody like at a hackathon, somebody came and showed me a thing that they had built with Cohere where it was like a website where you'd upload a PDF and then could ask questions about the PDF.
Right.
And that was like really cool. So he would show you like,
Interesting.
oh, like we were actually, it wasn't a hackathon. We were at a conference at U of T. And so he like uploaded the PDF that was the ticket and the schedule for the conference. And then instead of like trying to read through and find where the stuff was, he just had his little app open, like asking questions about it. So he'd be like, oh, when's lunch or something? And it would tell him. Like that was, yeah,
Interesting.
that was pretty
If
cool. Yeah.
that is cool. I mean, that makes me think of like, a company that has a knowledge base or even a
Mhm.
website with
Mhm.
content, being developing an application where you could just ask a question and it would take that content
Oh,
and find it. Would that
yeah. Yeah, I think we're quite close to every website just having a little chatbot window that is like
mm,
pulling the source material from the website, and it's just a navigational tool. So like imagine you have your your frequently asked questions listed somewhere, you have information about your website, whatever, and instead of the user coming to the website having to navigate and finding the relevant thing, they'll just open up the thing and be like, where's the what's the return policy, and it'll just grab the relevant stuff and push it there. Yeah, so
yeah.
I think we're very close to that.
How much how much of the heavy lifting does Cohere's language model do in a use case like that versus the customer needing to configure it in a certain way, add various parameters, give it certain training data? Like where does the effort kind of sit? Is it a case of you plug in Cohere and all of a sudden you've got it up and running, or is there more to it to tune it and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is maybe an interesting conversation of just like where this space is right now. So like we sell an API. We sell an API into large language models. With that API, the thing I just described could be built like very easily. It could be, you could go and use our embedding to find, our embedding endpoint to find the relevant text. You could then put that into a prompt into our command model, our command nightly model, which is being constantly updated and improved. You could say, answer the following question based on this text. Here's the question. Um, we sell that API. We don't sell a front end. Like we don't sell we don't sell a widget we don't sell an integration. Like we sell the
Mm.
raw tools. And that's true for like us and the other companies that are out there right now. Like there's AI 21, OpenAI, like the other handful of companies that sell models like this, access to models, and that's because it takes an enormous amount of resources and time to build models like this. Like, there's a reason why there's only a few companies in the world that are releasing models, because it's enormously resource intensive, and it takes a really particular skill set and a whole like the time and focus of a lot of really smart people. So that's what we're we're focused on that API. Like, that's what we want to add the value on. But I think, it's such an exciting time for this tech, because just figuring out, just if somebody, you see a use case of, hey, like, I know I could build that or something, or I know I could add this into my site. Like, there's a lot of opportunity now that we're and the other people out there are selling access to these models for people to build stuff on top of it. And that the building stuff on top of it, like the language modeling part of it, is really only a small piece. Like, the language modeling of the thing I just described is pretty straightforward. The UX, like figuring out what it looks like, figuring out where it should be, like figuring out how to communicate to the user that what you're getting back is generated from a language model, figuring out how to like make sure you're displaying the relevant text you saw in case the user wants to validate like what the source of that information was, or things like that. Like, those are all decisions that would need to be made. And our expertise is in making the language models and giving access to developers for them to build stuff like this.
Interesting. Where did that expertise come from then? So, you mentioned that there isn't a whole huge number of people and companies that do this. AI 21, OpenAI. I'm sure, and I know from behind the scenes of Alexa and stuff, that Amazon have got some kind of things going on, but it's not publicly available. Same thing with Google Lambda. It's kind of got things kicking off, but it's not really publicly available. Like, and it's because it takes a lot of data, takes a lot of compute, takes a lot of skills. Where did it come from? For you then, how did you get into a situation where you think to yourself, I think I'm going to create a company that's going to basically have an API that kind of produces large language models? Where
Or
did
like
that
me
come from?
personally.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I've been excited about AI for a while now. I worked at Google here in Toronto under Jeff Hinton for 3 years. I was one of the so we like started up the Toronto Brain office, and I was extraordinarily lucky to get to work and learn from him for many years. For those of you who don't know, Jeff Hinton is a researcher who's largely credited as one of the three inventors of neural nets. So he was really pivotal in
Wow.
the creation. He's been working on neural nets for, I don't know, his whole life, as far as I can tell. Yeah, so I got to work with him, and that's really where I that's where I feel like I built chops as a researcher. And I was not working on language when I was working in the Brain office in Toronto. I was working on vision stuff, capsule networks, adversarial examples, and explainable ML. None of which are really related to language at the time. But that's where I met Aidan Gomez, who's the another co-founder of Cohere, and he was an author of one of the paper that kicked off the Transformers stuff. So talking to him, he got me really excited about language modeling. And then we noticed in Google that language models were having an impact on what Google was building. We were seeing like, wow, this tech is like really, it's making things so much better. It's making search better. It's making all these things within Google better, but like nobody outside of Google has access to these. So it was that made us, along with our other co-founder, Ivan, who's really excited about this stuff too. It was us that kind of galvanized us to be like, cool, let's go out, let's make a company with the express purpose of creating large language models and giving people access to them so that they can build stuff with them.
Nice. And what year was that?
We started at 2020, so we've been doing this for 3 years now.
Wow, interesting. It's interesting how, that's a fairly short space of time, and to go from just an idea to being one of the kind of major LLM players is quite an achievement.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. It's challenging. It's certainly hard, but it's been a lot of fun, and it's an exciting space, and it keeps on getting more exciting. So, yeah.
What is the most kind of challenging part? What's been the biggest sort of challenges you've had to overcome over the last 3 years?
I think one of the biggest challenges is just how fast the space moves. Like, it's like I feel like I learn something new about transformers like every few weeks or something, or people change their mind about the right way to train them, or they point out some new thing that you didn't think they could do that actually they can do, or that point out, hey, if something they can do if they just had the right data, then they could do that too. So just keeping up with the pace of this has been challenging. Yeah, but I mean that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it exciting. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's what makes
absolutely.
I think that's challenging for the people who work here. Like I think everybody at Cohere finds like, wow, I'm working on a tech that's like changing underneath me, and one day I'll be working on something, and then somebody else, down the hall will find something else out that's like super relevant to what I'm working on. So I think keeping that up, like that pace, is certainly challenging for people here. But I think that's one of the things that excites them, and I think that's why there's so many people who are here who work so hard. Like Cohere is really full of people who like give it their all. And I think that in part, I think that's because the technology itself is just like a fun thing to try your hardest at. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of the companies that we speak with, they have this feeling that they're kind of not quite able to keep up with things, not quite able to keep up with technology, not quite able to keep up with where
Yeah.
things are headed and stuff like that. Yet Cohere is a company that is at the bleeding edge of this.
Yeah.
And it's not as if like you're just sitting about like noticing things happening in the external environment and then reacting to it. It sounds as though you're actually, you're on the bleeding edge. So you're the company basically that's pushing the boundaries and finding new avenues of improving things and stuff like that. So how do you kind of how do you how do you manage that side of things? Because obviously you mentioned there, everyone at Cohere is working at trying to, trying to improve things, trying to discover new things, researching new areas. Like, how do you manage that? Because it sounds like it could be quite chaotic.
Yeah. I mean, we try our best, like, yeah, we just try our best. Yeah, I think some people might be tempted in my position to say, oh yeah, we totally know what's going on. Like we're ahead of the curve. Like we're always 5 steps ahead. We're playing 4D chess over here or something. But
Mm,
that's like when you're working on a company whose core offering is keeping up to date with scientific developments, putting those into practice and making them useful for people. I know we're just, yeah, you gotta hire really smart people. You gotta hire really passionate people. You gotta hire people who like the technology itself. And then you all have to
mm,
try your hardest. And there are moments where you say like, wow, we made the wrong, we bet on the wrong horse there. Like we thought this was the best learning algorithm. And now this paper came out that says, actually, no, that's a terrible learning algorithm. You need to use this one. Or sometimes we read a paper that says, this is definitely the right way to do it. Like this is the data that you need. And we find out internally, actually that data is not helpful at all. We didn't need that. And we spent time working on it. So I think that's just the nature of working on a tech like this. Yeah.
mm. And how much of what you do is kind of like that? One hand, it seems more kind of exploratory, which is new research comes out, you're on top of the new research, you're trying to put that stuff into practice to build a better product, versus another approach to some products would be we've got a defined roadmap that we know
Mhm.
because we've either got feedback from customers or we know ourselves that there's things here we need to do, which is a bit more kind of planned. How much
Yeah.
of what you do is like planned? We've got a roadmap. We know what's coming up in the next 6 months. We're going to just build that. Versus
Yeah.
exploratory, like we're keeping on top. We're trying this. We're trying that, and we're kind of trying to see if we can break new ground. Is there a kind of balance between those two?
It's certainly a bit of both. It's certainly a bit of both. Um, I think we respond to our users a little bit more than perhaps some of the other LLM providers out there. So we spend a little more time, I think, talking to people and being like, okay, what do you actually need? Like, this is cool tech, but like, what do you actually need? Like, what's actually going to solve the problem? Um, and so that probably weights us a little more on the like listening to users, hearing what they need, defining a roadmap, communicating that roadmap to them, and then trying to build it. Probably
Mm,
weights us a little bit more than the like open-ended. We're just going to work on anything that we think is pushing us towards AGI. But we certainly are pushing the boundaries. We're certainly like trying to do new stuff, break new ground for the sake of building a useful product. Um,
mm. Nice. You kind of alluded to transformers there. Could you explain to someone who isn't familiar with transformers what a transformer based NLP system is and how that
yeah,
kind of functions?
yeah. Yeah. Someone who isn't familiar with transformers or someone who isn't familiar with machine learning?
I think there's probably people listening who are broadly familiar with machine learning. There's
Okay.
people who I'm just thinking of the more kind of creatives who are more conversation
Mhm.
designers. They understand if you talk about entities and intents and model training and stuff like that. But when we start getting into the realms of discussing specific training methodologies and specific
Okay.
technologies, it's not really their remit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that informs the answer because that kind of stuff, the like, oh, intent matching or things like that, I think is increasingly less relevant.
Mm,
So if you guys have been running this for a while around chatbots, and I imagine a lot of
mhm,
what it's based off is like, things like voice flow or something,
mhm,
which
mhm,
is, which is a conversational tree that you define, and there's like nodes in it, right? And if somebody says this, then we're going to go down this route, and then we're going to do this and something, and you can like design that whole thing, and that's the chatbot. It kind of exists in this
mhm.
static form. That's not what ChatGPT is. That's not what like the people who have built chatbots with our models like that's not what they're building. Um, it's so that's the kind of I mean I talked earlier about the like Siri versus LLM thing, and
Yeah,
like that's
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of the distance. So those older things are like template matching. They were like if somebody asks a question that's about this, then we're going to respond with this or something. And you
Mhm,
can use neural nets you could use machine learning to train when are we going to do that jump? Like somebody said this, but oh, they really should be talking about this. Like, when are we going to do that? But that you're still like within the realm of a tree, of a conversational tree.
yeah.
Um, the chatbots that are coming out now and that I think will come out over the next little bit are much um, they're much more like sampling just from the model. So the way that works is, and the way transformers work is, we create this neural net and we train this neural net on to be really good at predicting the next word in a sequence of words. So like that's the training regime. We take as much data as we can. We start with all the text we could get from the web, and we train the model so that when it sees a list of like a sequence of words, it does a good job of predicting which word is likely to come next. That's like that. That's the whole thing. It's just a probabilistic model of sequences of words. So that's the baseline model. And if you do that, if you write something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you let it degenerate, it will write 7, 8, 9, 10. Like it'll just keep counting, right? Or if you say something like, hello, how are you doing today? It might say good or something. It'll output a next word that's like quite normal. Um,
Mhm,
and that's the underlying tech. It's just probabilistic modeling of language. Now you wrap that in a layer of fine tuning off of what people actually think. Like you get a bunch of people, you say, here's the output of the model. Like, was that helpful? And they say, yes, it was. And then you get the model to do more of that. Or they say, no, that's not good. And then you remove that. You don't get the model to do that. So when you're done with that, then you don't just have a probabilistic model of language. You have a probabilistic model of language fine tuned on what people find useful. So that's another thing. Like you can go on to Cohere, you'll be put into our command nightly model, and you can write me a blog post outline involving a title and 3 paragraphs about this awesome podcast I was on where we talk about LMs or something, and then it will output that. Or you can say, write me a JSON object with names of all the members of the Beatles and their birthdays, and it'll output that or something. And that's because it's been refined on people giving it instructions and then it following that instruction. Um, you can do that again for chat. And so now it's like, don't just fine tune it off of what like a command following, fine tune it off of what people find useful in a dialogue. So when we have that, now we're no longer saying if somebody says, you know, what are your hours or something, generate the hours, you're just gonna like generate from the model. And that's what ChatGPT is. ChatGPT is just generating from this fine-tuned model. That actually, although very cool as like an individual to use or something, is like not super useful for businesses because businesses
mm.
don't just want the model to say when they're open. They actually know when they're open and they want the model to like actually listen to this thing. They want the model to be able to say like, okay, I don't just sample when most businesses are like when the most likely business to open is. Read the text that is about my business and give the user that. And that's what grounded question answering is. Like you can take our generate endpoint. You can use like we have an open source repo called Grounded QA, and that just combines our endpoints so that you can ask it a question, give it a database of things, and then it will pull the most relevant thing, answer, and provide the answer based on that context.
Right.
So I think that's where the space of chatbots is going to be moving. Yeah.
Interesting. So there's a question from Richard here. Shout out to Richard. And it's I don't know if this is the exact question that you're asking, Richard. I think it could be, but we had we've been looking a lot at the role of large language models in conversational AI, chatbots, and voice
Mhm.
assistants and stuff like that. We've seen a number of the platforms, the enterprise conversational orchestration platforms that have the NLUs kind of under the hood, talk a lot about kind of the the core of a conversation. For example, that example you gave about opening times, or an
Mhm.
example of maybe booking an appointment, where there's very specific bits of data that are needed in order to do
Yeah.
something. What time are you going to turn up? How many people are you going to have in the restaurant if you're going to book a table? Stuff like that. And so the concept emerging from certain circles is that the core conversation would still be an intent based conversation based on that older
Yeah.
kind of methodology you just described. And then when something happens that's not expected, large
Mhm.
language models will then come to the rescue, so to
Yeah.
speak, and then get the conversation back on track. But what you've kind of just described there, in terms of if you're giving the LLM business data, there's no real reason why you couldn't give that LLM business logic and rules.
Yeah.
For example, book an appointment with this person, make sure you get how many people, what time they're going to turn up, and this, that, and the other. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your philosophy in terms of where that's going. Do you think there'll still be that intent model needed for those transactional use cases, or do you think an LLM can handle that with the right
Yeah.
kind of input?
So I think we're not going to see a ton of that in the end. I think what we are going to see is an LLM that exists for a company. It has a database of things, like it has the website where they've written all their facts that it can pull from, and it has a list of things that it can do, like a list of actions. And those
Mm,
actions will be coded. Those like defined by rules. So the action will be like, someone wants to sign up. Here's the function you call to get somebody to sign up. And that function, maybe it's going to like output a little page for them to fill in, maybe a sequence of messages or something, but it will be like a call to the function. But it's the LLM that will decide, like based on the data that's seen and the prompt that it's been given, when to call those functions. So I kind of think like the inverse of this. Like I don't think
mm.
there's going to be a voice flow tree that somebody designed that occasionally will have like a node that says question mark like LLM free space or something. Like I don't think it's going to be that. It's going to be like an LLM. This is what you're talking to. It has a bunch of information about you and a bunch of things it can do when the conversation requires it. And when those things are called, then it will do stuff. I think the idea of like, you know, every new technology comes along and people are like, oh, the hybrid approach with the old one or something. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes it's actually, that's what you need. But sometimes it would be like, I've just invented the car, but surely I'll put a trailer and have some horses on the back in case and then when the car breaks down, I'll bring the horses out and they can drag or it would be worse than that. It would be like, oh, I'll get my horses to carry around a car so that when they get tired, I can back out and drive. So I don't think it's
Yeah,
quite, yeah.
interesting. How would you handle things like um, API calls to certain business systems that are required to either input or retrieve data? If an LLM is managing the conversation, if you've got an API, which is
Mhm.
the LLM doing its magic,
Yeah, yeah.
presumably then you need some kind of code that handles some logic to do those API calls, or not?
Yeah. So also to be clear, what I'm talking about right now, like we have like this, we haven't built. This is not an
Yeah,
offering
yeah,
of
no,
code.
yeah. Hypothetical. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think one day we will have a thing, and we and other people, I think this is the way where this space is moving. Um, so you'll have a thing where you can define like here's a set of actions. Like if somebody says they want to buy these shoes, like what you need to call is add to cart shoe ID, user ID blank or something. And like that
Mm,
would be the like and the model will occasionally output that. And you'll have a little thing that's saying like running on the outputs and saying, oh, did they output that? Like cool, run, do this now or something.
mm,
Yeah, I mean that like I'm not sure, but I've seen LLMs have been used to take action before by thinking about it like modeling it like a language problem, and the language
yeah.
problem is just augmented. So instead of it just being a conversation, it's a conversation where every now and again one of the people says like, "Do this thing," like
Yeah.
asterisk the thing, and then we trigger off of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it seems as though that's where a lot of the challenges are
Mhm.
in the kind of conversational AI chatbot kind of space, is that it's one, having conversations based on that tree-based logic is an inherent issue, you know.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
yeah.
there are times where I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I think there are people who've successfully made tree-based chatbots that like add value to their users. And if that's adding value to their users, like throwing an LLM in there for a few things might make sense. Maybe there's like a moment where it's like, okay, here actually it is just free form. We need to have this free form conversation, and then we're going to jump back into the tree. Like maybe that makes sense. But I don't know. I don't feel like, here's what I'll say. If I go to a website and I see a little chat window pop up and I can tell that it's a tree-based thing, I'm not gonna talk to it. Like I don't believe in its ability to add value. Like I think I'm probably a better navigator of the website than that chatbot that exists. I don't think that for LLMs. You know, I'm as a co-founder, I build lots of stuff with our API, and one of the I build Discord bots, and some of them I just build for myself. And like they you do useful things for me. Like I don't use Google search very much anymore. Now I use like an LLM backed search that calls out to search to Google, finds relevant stuff, and then gives it back to me in a conversational flow. So like I imagine if we really want to add value to the user and like make sure that it's better than them just navigating the website, got to be powered by an LM. Yeah,
Definitely. That sounds really good. What about the question of kind of control? You know, one of the things that kind of gets said often is around LLMs hallucinating and all this kind of stuff. Like, from what you've been discussing so far, it sounds as though a lot of your customers use Cohere in conjunction with other business data. So perhaps that's where the control is. But I'm just wondering your thoughts in terms of, for businesses or for individuals wanting to use these LLMs, how do you manage that potential for
yeah,
hallucination or incorrect content?
yeah. So this is I think something people get wrong with LLMs sometimes. Like LLMs are not a good source of truth. Like a large language model has no notion of what is true or what is not true. It just has a notion of statistical correlations in sequences of words. Like that's it. It turns out that statistical correlations of words is like good enough to often say things that people interpret as true. Because read a bunch of stuff from the web, like there's way more sentences that say Ottawa is the capital of Canada than there are sentences that say Halifax is the capital of Canada. So if you say what is the capital of Canada, you're probably going to get Ottawa. But that's just because it happened to show up that often, right? If you say like who is the prime minister of the UK, it spits out all kinds of things. That seems like it changes every few weeks. So it'll say all kinds of things because those things have been true at various times. But the model has no notion of time or no notion of as truth changes with time. It just has the statistical modeling. So I think the groundedness is like fundamentally important for making these things useful, because you as a business, you're actually saying what you think is true. That's what you need your user to interact with. That's the information that the user didn't come there for random facts or random sentences. They came there for information. You want to make sure that information is there. So the way we deal with that, and the way people who are building with LLMs deal with that, is just by putting that stuff in the prompt. So the prompt is the text you get the model to complete. Like you give it some text, you get some text back. If you include in that prompt the relevant information, then it's way less likely to hallucinate. That's still I think that's still, you still might get an output that's incorrect. The way the modeling works is there's some randomness in it. So that means there's some use cases though, I just don't ever think, I don't think LLMs are going to be useful for some things. For instance, I don't think you're ever going to want to, I think you're always going to want to talk to a doctor. I don't think you're ever going to say, here's my medical history, LLM, tell me what to do. You might use it as a way of thinking, or learning about it yourself, or or browsing. It might be an interface for browsing through medical journals or something. That's it. But your health, you're never going to want randomness in the thing that was output. You're going to want somebody to say, I've studied this. I'm the expert. I, as a human, talk to you as a human. I tell you, this is my best. This is my best thinking. This is what I think is the right answer. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. We've got a couple of questions. Let me just see if we can pick through
Mhm.
these. How long do you think before customers are using LLMs against businesses or to reduce the need for contact? What are the pros and cons? You might have to elaborate on that a little bit, Mike, if you don't mind. Charlie, what are your views on adding radioactive tags to responses coming from LLMs? I'm looking
Oh,
at it from an educational point of view and academic integrity.
oh, that makes sense. Radioactive meaning what are we looking at the tags of somebody putting out text that is somehow noticeable? So you could say, hey, this was generated as by an LLM or this was not.
Ah, okay. Right,
Yeah,
I think so.
that makes sense. Um, so there are some techniques that you can do to like detect generated text. Um, I expect those to not work for very long. And I expect them even now they don't work very well. Like even now you can output
How would
text.
you how would you even do that though? Because
Well, so
I
one
have
this
seen some examples of that, but
yeah.
how are you even supposed to do that?
So here's one technological way you can do it. You can take a language model and you can take some text and you can get the language model to calculate what is the probability that I would have output that text. And if the probability is
Right.
very high, you can say, hey, well, this model could have done it. Like maybe it didn't, but it could have. That's like one thing. Another thing is you can train a classifier on all human text, like all real text and all synthetic text. And there are some statistical differences between them. Like our statistical modeling of language doesn't quite match the real distribution of language. People, like for instance, people are much better at using words, like really unlikely words effectively. So like,
Right.
maybe there's a word that like once a year you say, but when you say it in the right way. Language
Mm.
models are like not quite as good at that. So there's some statistical things that are different and you can try to use that. But I think over time, those will get worse. As our ability to model language gets better, I think that detection will get worse. Um, for academic integrity, don't think this is that big of a deal. I
Mm.
think I think knowing that the text you're reading is synthetic is very important for other use cases. For instance, I think it's very important that if you're reading from a bot, you know that it's a bot. I think that's really important. And that's why like in our terms of use, it says you can't pass what is written here off. Like you can't generate from this bot and send it to a person and say a human wrote this. You
Mm.
can generate from the bot, have a human read it and be like, yeah, that's good. I clicked the thing. Great. Like I wrote that. And like,
Mm.
if the human agrees with what's said and is happy with it and sends it off, I'm fine with them saying like, this is from me. Like I as a person certify that this is what I wanted to communicate. I'm communicating it. I think this is going to require a change to the way people mark undergrad essays, probably. But like, if you
Mm.
go back through the history of, I mean, hell, I was like seeing things of, I think I'm going to get this wrong because my ancient history and philosophy is not great. But there's a time of Plato being like, we should really be worried about writing because people aren't going to remember things correctly anymore if they can just refer to text that was written down, and people said the same thing about all. I mean, like I'm a person, like I'm a very bad speller. I can hardly spell. Um, Spell check was super useful for me. And I remember there was a time when teachers were like, you're never going to learn how to spell. This is a thing you got to work on. It's going to slow you down forever, like
Mm.
that. And now that I can spell check, like it helps a lot. So I think education will have to respond similarly. Like if you're asking a student to write an essay, and the essay can be generated, and you can get a great mark from like a large language model, it's probably not like how useful is it for the is that really the question you want to be asking the person? Like, is that really the way you want to be teaching them? I think,
Mm.
yeah. So I'm not sure if
Yeah.
the question is here, come up with a novel idea that you believe in and write down your argument and then use an LLM to expand on that argument for the sake of time or something. Or like, if you have this idea, you want to write it, you've used it to like, help you write that conclusion, which is often difficult to synthesize all of your points or something. Like, I think that's great. But if the question is
Mm.
just like write a thing, generate it from this thing, and now that like if that was good enough, that probably wasn't the right test anyways. So yeah, I know
Yeah, that makes sense.
I might be wrong about that. Like that's an opinion that I know, my sister is a teacher. I actually haven't spoken. Well, I actually haven't spoken to her about this.
I thought you were going to say I haven't spoken to her since I told her this idea.
No. Her students are a little young, so they wouldn't be writing essays. But she's always been very technologically. She's always like ahead of the curve on this. So I'd be curious. But yeah, anyways, I might be wrong about that, but that's my current view on it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense though, because essentially what that is framed as is this test is a test of your ability basically to kind of remember lots of stuff, which is a lot of what school is, kind of thing, isn't it? It's about remembering things and then regurgitating things often. Would you agree or not?
Yeah, I certainly was that way to begin with. I found as I went along in my academic career, every year was a little less of that, and that meant that every year I enjoyed
Yeah.
it more. That was
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, that's fair enough. Where do you stand on for example, there was something on LinkedIn I saw from a guy who had, in the space of about 5 days, written a book on something like I can't remember what it was, data security or something like that, using ChatGPT.
Mm,
And my question was, it wasn't a statement in terms of an opinion because I don't have an opinion on it yet. But the
yeah.
question that I had was, who gets the kind of credit for the book? Who gets the remuneration from the book? And is there a danger that somewhere in that book there is some plagiarism?
So yeah, this is a big topic these days. It's relevant for language models and also relevant for image generation.
Yeah.
I think it's a little more relevant for image generation,
Mm.
because I think, and this is like a scientific opinion, and perhaps, yeah, and this is something that's probably changing. I think image models right now are better at remembering things exactly that they've seen only once than language models are. For the most part,
Mm.
like when a language model regurgitates something verbatim from the training set, it's because it's seen it many, many, many times. It doesn't
Mm.
do it very often with like just one example. Um, so that means you're like less likely to get that. I also think if you're, as the space of language is so huge that as soon as you like add, it's pretty unlikely for you to be able to get the model to regurgitate like a paragraph exactly that somebody else wrote. Um,
Mm.
if that could happen, I mean, in our use case, like in our terms of service, like right now, if you use something with Cohere, like that's your text. Um,
Right.
and we feel confident in saying that, like, we've trained it from, at most of like as much of the web, the open web, the public web as we could, but then we refine it now on use cases, on individuals. We refine it on feedback, and that feedback is stuff that we're listed that we're creating in house. So in our terms of service, you would own it, and I think statistically that's actually like a fine point of view because it's so unlikely for you to regurgitate something completely. Now, I would say that book that guy wrote, probably not very good. Just like it's probably not like if you've written a book and you wrote it in 5 days just by generating from a model, because like it's probably not verbatim from anybody else, but it's going to be a pretty clear synthesis of stuff that's already written.
Mm.
You're going to be getting like, especially if it's about a topic that lots of people have already written and is available publicly on the web, you're going to get, I actually think that the quality of the output would be similar to somebody just sitting down and themselves writing for 5 days because they've read all these things before. Some of it they're going to remember and have forgotten, but they'll write it in different sentences, like some of it, but it probably won't be very good because they haven't added anything new to the discourse.
Mm.
So I don't think we're going to see like over the, there are lots of people who generate spam books and then there's like a whole world of people writing terrible books through hiring writers and then like hiring a
Mm.
voice actor to voice it and then putting it on Amazon, on Audible to try to make money from it or something. And like it, nobody's really benefiting from that being added to the discourse. I'm sure people might try to use language models for that. There too, I don't think many people are going to read those books. And I don't think it's not really the way to make yourself known as an author. Yeah.
Interesting. What about the future then? What are some of the things that you really wish LLMs could do that they can't do today?
That's a great question. That they can't do today. I mean, there's a lot that they can do to. So there's some things that I think LLMs will always be bad at, and I'm fine with that. Like I said at the beginning, like LLMs are not a good source of truth. Like, and I don't think they should be. Like, I don't think we should try to get LLMs to store in their weights the set of true facts about the world. I don't think that's useful. So I don't think they're good at that, but I don't want them to be. Like, we have other mechanisms for that. We have other mechanisms of determining what the database is, like what the facts are. I wish they could follow instructions better. I wish it was easier to like. I wish they had longer context windows. Actually, this is a very clear one. Language models right now have like a finite amount of text they can like hold in memory effectively. You give it like the transformer has, I said it's like a probabilistic model of a sequence of text. Well, there's a maximum length that sequence can be. I wish that was true. Yeah. And so that means like sometimes people will be like, hey, can I summarize like an article I wrote? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You just put the article in the prompt, you write like TLDR at the bottom, and then you click generate and a summary will come out. Like, that's so cool. Like, can I summarize like, a novel I wrote? And I'm like, it's going to be a lot harder. Like, that's going to be,
right.
You're going to have to like iteratively like summarize the first page and then the second page, and then take those summaries and summarize them and something like that's, you're probably going to drift. So I wish the context window was larger. Yeah. And that's something that will happen. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a good point. It's always been my kind of opinion that most of the stuff that people do on a daily basis can kind of be like broken down into something akin to a conversational interface. Like everything you do on a computer, for example, in theory, there's no reason why you need to be typing and mousing and all this kind of stuff, because it's just things, it's just button clicks and stuff like that. So everything really could be a conversational interface. And this is what I thought Alexa would kind of kick off. It didn't quite get to that point. But I'm wondering where you're seeing the future from a kind of human computer interaction point of view going, based on large language models and where that go. Will everything be a conversational interface, or do you think there's a lot more to it than that?
No, I think everything will be a conversation interface. Like, not everything. Like, I think there's some things that are gonna like, not everything. I think like you're not going to use a conversational interface to play League of Legends. You're not going to use a conversational interface to use like Illustrator to paint on your computer. You're probably not going to use it to type. You're probably faster at typing it than you are at dictating, and like it's kind of helpful, I think, to do that. You might occasionally type when you might sit back and like think something slowly aloud, but you're going to type. But I think the default interface will be language. Yeah. And I think that because we spend our entire lives learning language. Like that's arguably that's one of the things we spend the most time on. And it's always been really weird to me that we sit in front of a computer and don't use any of it. Like and the reason why we don't use any of it is going back to that, like Alexa didn't work. Like Alexa doesn't work. People don't ask questions of their, like, I don't really know any very often. And that's because it looks like it's going to work. And then it doesn't. And as soon as it doesn't a few times, it's enormously infuriating. Like, wow. You ever been like trying to tell your Google Home to stop playing a song that's terrible? And it's like, what? I can't hear you, and continue to play it.
Yeah.
Wow. Did
you say turn it up? Every time I used to say turn it off, it would turn it up.
Now, to be fair to Google Home, like that instance right there, that actually has nothing to do with the language modeling, and that's just with the audio. Like there's still lots of smart people taking audio and turning that into text. But yeah, I do think that's where we're going to move. Like, I think in the next few years, you will frequently interact with a computer through natural language, and whether that's dictating or writing out things. Yeah, I think the future will be you'll open up your browser and there'll be a little bar and you'll just say what you want it to do. And instead of like Google searching and then clicking the link and then doing the thing, you'll just be like, oh, show me the headline of the BBC or something, or, buy me a new guitar or something from this store, and they'll just link you to it.
Yeah. Nice. That sounds absolutely ideal. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining me. This has been an immense eye-opening conversation that I've really enjoyed. I'm sure those tuning in would have enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the time. Thank you for having me on. We really appreciate it.
No worries. And for those of you that want to check it out, I recommend going to cohere.ai, COHERE.ai.
Just to give a shout out, go to Cohere, check out our playgrounds, and if you do that, you'll be brought into a window where you can like type a command and then get the text output, and there's everything you need for building with that, like all the code, lots of start guides, lots of blog posts describing using our various endpoints. Check it out and build some cool stuff.
Nice one. Wicked. Do that indeed. Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been wicked.
Thank you.